Welcome to FOXSOUL's Black Report. This is a space where we bring you Black America's headline news, views, and opinions. I'm Romeo.
Hey there, I'm Brooke.
I'm Demi. And on today's report, Maxine Waters' opponent, Joe Collins, loses again. Prosecutors seek a very stiff sentence for Derek Chauvin, and food delivery apps settle discrimination claims.
We're going to break down President Biden's latest push to increase vaccinations. A school board in Florida is renaming 6 schools. We'll show you why. And find out which European country has decided to pay an African country reparations.
We're going to have all of that and so much more because it is our voice and our truth. So let's talk about it.
Prosecutors in Minnesota want Derek Chauvin to serve 30 years in prison. NPR reports prosecutors wrote in a court filing Wednesday Chauvin's actions were egregious and a sentence of 30 years would properly account for the profound impact of his conduct. In separate filings, an attorney for Chauvin argued he should get probation and his incarceration should be limited to time already served. A jury convicted Chauvin in late April of second and third degree murder as well as second-degree manslaughter for George Floyd's death. He is set to be sentenced June 25th. Let's break down some things here. So defense attorneys say this is something that's gotten a lot of attention. Defense attorneys are arguing for probation, time served, saying that Chauvin is a product of a broken system, which is an interesting point to make coming from his side, because a lot of his supporters argue that he did what he was supposed to do. And so, and throughout his trial, he essentially said he did what he was supposed to do. He did what he was allowed to do. He did what he thought he should have done. And now saying like, hey, listen, the system is broken and I'm a product of that. But also a lot of people who agree that who believe he should serve a lot of time in prison believe, yes, the system is broken and you are one of the perpetrators of that brokenness, right? And not a victim of that. George Floyd would have been a victim of that. So I think that's interesting. I also just want to note that, the state guidelines top out at 15 years, but the reason we're looking at up to 75 years is because Judge Peter Cahill has already ruled that there were aggravating factors in George Floyd's death, finding Chauvin treated Floyd with particular cruelty, abused his position of authority as a police officer, and committed his crime as part of a group of 3 or more people, and that he pinned Floyd down in the presence of children. One last thing. The AP talked to a former federal prosecutor, Mark Osler. He's now a professor at the University of St. Thomas School of Law, saying the defense attorney's request for probation is not unusual at all. And also what I thought was interesting, saying that neither side is at all very likely going to get what they're asking for.
Yeah.
It's just very upsetting that people think that he did what he was supposed to do. Kill a black man in broad daylight, kneel on his neck for over 9 minutes, not even getting up when the paramedics showed up. He had to tap him on the shoulder and say, can you please get up so I can assist him? Because you didn't, because maybe that wasn't part of his job. I don't know. At the end of the day, most people feel like he should spend the rest of his life in jail for what the world had to witness and what George Floyd's family would have to just go through for the rest of their lives.
Brooke, I wanted to go back to the separate filing by Eric Nelson, because, we talk a lot on the show that Eric Nelson, as an attorney, he is technically doing his job, doing the best that he can. But what I thought was just really a slap in the face that, he also added that he wanted the court to consider Chauvin's age, also his lack of criminal history, also the way that he cooperated in the investigation, as well as his attitude in the court. So all of that, where we were like, wow, like Chauvin is just so stone-faced. He hasn't smiled. He didn't want to say anything in court. That all circles back into they wanted to use that as a reason. I imagine that Eric Nelson was like, hey, just, keep an even kill. Don't make any, be cooperating, so that they could come back and use that, further. Also, he added that Chauvin was unaware. This is where it was a really slap in the face, Brooke and Romeo. He said that Chauvin was unaware that he was committing a crime. He said that they best describe it as an error in his experience as a police officer. And again, Eric Nelson, you are trying to do the very best that you can. Not that you're listening here to FOXSOUL's Black Report, but
he should be.
He should be. You should be, because that is a slap in the face to the black community to say that it was an error as a police officer and you had no idea that you were committing a crime.
True.
All right, guys. So during the 2020 election cycle, longtime California Congressmember Maxine Waters was challenged by Republican Joe Collins, who later accused her of libel and slander in a lawsuit that was dismissed by a judge last month. This week, Judge Yolanda Orozco ruled that Collins will have to pay more than $53,000 in Waters' attorney fees. Waters noted that Collins raised more than $10 million from right-wing organizations across the country in his run for the congressional seat, representing California's 43rd district, which is mainly South Los Angeles. He lost the election 2-1. So I want to make this story as if we love to see it was a story. So, you know, in a statement, Maxine Waters, she, of course, you know, she is no stranger to speaking her mind and, you know, hopping online and hopping in statements and saying how she feels and being very opinionated. She says, in the simplest terms, Joe Collins has once, yet again, done what he does best, which is lose. She also says, after filing a baseless and frivolous lawsuit against me that went nowhere, it became even more clear that Joe Collins is not in this for the people of the 43rd Congressional District. She also says he is instead in it for one person, that is himself. Joe Collins is nothing more than a serial filer of lawsuits looking to attract media. She says that cost him, this case, $53,589. So I just wanted to read that statement because I love when Auntie Maxine comes to the building, and I just love that spicy statement because it was just kind of like, hey, man, you tried, you lost, and it cost you over $53,000 in this case.
Yeah, it did. And, you know, and living out here in Los Angeles, we saw that hands-on, how they would go back and forth during that time. But at the end of the day, he called for her arrest, right? He did many things. Sometimes you have to say or do what you have to do to try to win an election. And now he lost that. He's not in, and now he has to cut a check for $53,000.
There's an interesting thing that happens with a lot of these far-right challengers, right? We're seeing them in states all across the country. They become really famous, and so and I'm not saying this is what's happening here, but I'm saying that it's a similar formula to what we have seen. Somebody, you know, first time, like looking to be a politician, decides they're going to run for office. They get a lot of attention, beating down on the incumbent and saying, hey, I'm going to come in and do this. I'm going to come in and do this. And then they lose, you know, it's a landslide, and there's a lawsuit. They've got a verified account on Twitter, and they say outlandish things, and people retweet them into fame. People outrage retweet them, like, oh, look at what he said. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a couple famous TV pundits that have been outraged, retweeted into fame. But I find that interesting how much attention one can get by running a pretty big failure of a campaign, and that's not you know, that's not my opinion. You know, the campaign was a big loser.
Yeah, it was. It really was.
And I'm fascinated by this. I'm fascinated by this lawsuit, by the motivation behind this. Was it really because you feel like the people in Congresswoman Waters' district didn't feel supported by her? That's not what the voters said, and that's not what, you know, I've heard, but I don't know. I find this a fascinating thing that we're seeing.
Well, we'll see if there's more to come with this situation.
Yeah.
We'll see that for sure. All right, Arizona's Attorney General has reached a settlement with third-party delivery apps over allegations of racial discrimination for waiving fees for Black-owned restaurants. Attorney General Mark Brnovich announced Wednesday that his office has settled civil rights cases with Uber Eats, Postmates, and DoorDash. In a response to a nationwide movement over racial justice, all three companies last year are accused of not charging delivery fees to Black-owned restaurants in Arizona. Brnovich's office argued this practice unfairly discriminated against non-Black restaurant owners and their customers, violating the Arizona Civil Rights Act. His office filed charges in November. Even with the best of intentions, corporations can do the wrong thing. Altering the price of goods or services based on race is illegal, Brnovich said in a statement. The delivery companies did not admit to violating any laws, but wanted to avoid long and costly litigation, according to the agreement. But under the terms of the agreement, they will revise their policies. They will no longer offer discounts, promotion, or other monetary incentives based on restaurant owners' race, nationality, religion, or gender. We all knew it was no secret. First of all, if you want to start a Black-owned business, it's a struggle sometimes to even do that. We know during the pandemic in 2020 that due to the pandemic, 21% of Black-owned business struggle, where white-owned business, it was only 5%. So we understand the difference, but it's kind of ironic how they're saying, all right, we don't want to keep going on with this, but we'll make sure everyone's treated equal moving forward. So if we see that really happens.
Well, I feel, I was split in the middle with this because I'm not upset that black, restaurants were getting this, luxury. But on the other hand, on my business mindset, my hospitality mindset, there are other businesses that struggle due to the pandemic other than black businesses. There are Latino businesses. We could just go on and on and on. There are other groups that struggled as well. So I could see how this could, if I'm just, playing devil's advocate here, I could see how there would maybe be a Latino mom and pop that would be like, hey, our business is struggling as well due to the pandemic. And, this might be taking business away. So I can understand how it could kind of rub some people the wrong way. But I'm not upset at them for wanting to be on the right side of history and give these black restaurants this luxury. So I can kind of understand both sides.
What I thought was interesting is that, it seemed as if the argument, you saw this with a lot of, uplift black businesses, the idea is that, hey, these businesses, disproportionately don't get a fair shot for a plethora of reasons, right? So let's do what we can, but by not charging delivery fees. But a big criticism I saw from a lot of people who feel like, capitalism won't free us is that at the same time, these companies, these bigger, larger companies, food delivery companies, are fighting against having to be forced to pay their workers a set minimum wage, having to consider them in states all across the country, having to consider them full-time employees and not just contract workers, having to provide benefits, things like health insurance, sick days, even, a lot of these employees during the pandemic, Demi brought up the pandemic, saying that, they were struggling to get PPE to carry out their jobs. And a lot of these low-income workers are disproportionately black. And so a lot of people were saying, if you actually want to help black people, pay the ones better that work for you.
That's true.
And that could have been a way, and you could have just done that for everybody across the board, all of your employees, and that could have been a really big, important way. But instead, they're spending, here in California, millions and millions of dollars to fight that. You remember that proposition on the ballot? So I find this interesting, and at the same time, I find it interesting that a state's attorney general was like, whoa, 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 this is unfair. We got to do something about this. This is what I need to focus on. There's a lot going on here, and a lot that could be done better all across the board, right?
Absolutely.
All right, a black security guard who worked for CNN is suing 2 Minnesota state troopers for $1 million for arresting him while helping the network cover the George Floyd protests last year. In his federal lawsuit, Michael Cooper alleges State Trooper Patrick Kelly and another unidentified trooper arrested him last May for breaking curfew and for illegally carrying concealed firearms, even though he was a security guard contracted to protect CNN journalists. The suit points out Cooper's arrest came a day after police arrested an Afro-Latino CNN reporter, Omar Jimenez. You're watching this right now. The arrest was broadcast live and was questioned at the time because other white crews from CNN and other networks were not being detained. Cooper's lawsuit also alleges the troopers did not arrest anyone else from the CNN crew he was supporting, all of whom were white and in the same area. A spokesperson for the Minnesota State Patrol declined to comment on the suit. CNN also did not comment on Cooper's suit. The Guardian notes, just going to Omar Jimenez's arrest there, that he had actually just shown a protester being arrested when the police officer surrounded him and didn't give a reason for his arrest. And, to the security guard here, what's frustrating for a lot of people, a federal court in Minnesota has decided that journalists deserve the right to cover these protests and that you cannot treat them like, hey, they're not following curfew. They have a job to be there just like you have a job to be there. And both of you essentially are exempt from that because somebody needs to be your checks and balances, just like you're saying you're being that to the protesters. And we've still seen repeatedly even those rules broken or challenged.
Yeah.
And, it's upsetting because, what do you do if journalists cannot be your eyes and ears? What do you do? And also if black journalists are scared and uncomfortable and not feeling safe.
Yeah, if they're targeted
if they feel
for no
targeted,
reason.
exactly, yeah.
This man was arrested for working while black. That's what that was, right? He had a valid HR 218, which allows him to carry a concealed firearm across the state line and things like that. So he was there for a reason. He was supposed to be there, and yet he still gets shamed. He still gets embarrassed. He still gets disrespected. So we're going to see what happens with this suit.
Yeah, I think he absolutely has the leg to stand on, especially after what we saw happen to Omar Jimenez just, what was it, a day before? And that was like national news over every platform. Everyone was talking about that. He was humiliated, as well as Cooper was humiliated. He was held in jail for 20 hours. His identification was knocked out of his hands. They ignored what he was saying. He wasn't resisting. I mean, this was just, he was humiliated. So I think he absolutely has the leg to stand on. And I'm also, like you guys, are looking forward to see what happens with this case.